What was it like to wake in Bethlehem on an ordinary morning in the first year of the Common Era, when the world had not yet realized what had just occurred within its walls? I invite you to step back with me, not as distant observers of history, but as witnesses to a moment suspended between prophecy and fulfillment, between the ordinary and the eternal. Bethlehem in the year AD was not yet a destination. It was simply home, a small town clinging to the Judean hills, its limestone houses stacked like prayers against the sky. The great events of empires unfolded elsewhere, in Rome, in Alexandria, in the gleaming courts of Herod's Jerusalem. Yet here, in this unassuming place, something had stirred that would reshape human history, though the shepherds and craftsmen moving through these streets could not have known it. The town itself was ancient even then, its name meaning house of bread, and its terraced fields had fed generations. Barley and wheat grew on the hillsides, olive groves silvered in the morning light, and vineyards clung to the slopes where David himself had once tended his father's flocks. The memory of kingship still haunted these streets. A millennium had passed since the prophet Samuel had walked this very path to anoint a shepherd boy as Israel's future king. The elders still told the stories, still reminded their children that Bethlehem was not insignificant in God's eyes, that greatness had come from here before and perhaps would again. But in this first year, Bethlehem was a place of waiting, waiting for Rome's census to end, waiting for pilgrims to pass through on their way to Jerusalem, waiting for news from the temple, waiting for deliverance. The air carried the scent of olive wood smoke and baking bread, the bleating of sheep from the surrounding hills, the rhythmic strike of a carpenter's hammer. Life continued as it always had, governed by seasons and Sabbaths, by births and deaths, by the demands of occupation and the consolations of faith. Rome's presence was everywhere, even here. The Pax Romana had brought order, roads and taxation. It had also brought soldiers, tribute collectors, and the constant grinding reminder that Judea belonged to someone else. The census that had recently brought so many strangers to Bethlehem was not an act of governance, but of care. It was control, pure and simple. A numbering, a claiming, a reminder that Caesar Augustus in distant Rome knew your name and expected your coin. Some families had traveled for days to register in their ancestral towns, crowding into homes of distant relatives, filling every available room, transforming this quiet village into a temporary city of strangers. The architecture itself told the story of survival under occupation. Houses built of pale limestone rose 2 or 3 stories, their flat roofs connected by narrow passages, creating a maze of terraces where families dried fruit, stored grain, and slept under the stars during the hot months. The lower levels often housed animals, donkeys, goats, sheep, whose body heat warmed the human quarters above during cold winter nights. This was not poverty, but practicality, the ancient wisdom of people who had learned to thrive in harsh land under harder rulers. If this journey into the past is drawing you in, I invite you to subscribe and walk with me through more ancient cities where faith and history intertwined. There are many streets yet to explore together. Within this framework of empire, daily life in Bethlehem maintained its own sacred rhythm. The synagogue stood at the heart of communal life, not merely as a building, but as the pulse of identity. Here the Torah was read every Sabbath. Debates unfolded about the law and the prophets, and the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were remembered aloud. The people of Bethlehem were not simply subjects of Rome. They were children of covenant, carriers of hope, that one day the Anointed One, the Messiah, would come and restore what had been lost. I want you to imagine a typical morning in this town. Women moved to the well before dawn, clay jars balanced on their shoulders, their voices low as they exchanged news about births, illnesses, marriages being arranged, and whispered concerns about Roman tax increases. The well was more than a water source. It was the town's gathering place, where information flowed as freely as the spring water that had sustained this community for centuries. Young girls learned here how to balance jars, how to navigate social hierarchies, how to listen for what was not being said. Men led their flocks out to pasture at first light, following paths worn smooth by countless generations of shepherds. Others bent over their trades in small workshops open to the street, weavers at their looms, metalworkers heating bronze over charcoal fires, potters shaping clay on wheels turned by foot, carpenters measuring and cutting timber brought up from the Jordan Valley. The sounds of work filled the morning air, the thud of the fuller's mallet, the scrape of stone on stone from the grain mills, the calls of merchants announcing fresh bread, dried fish brought up from the Sea of Galilee, dates and figs from Jericho. Children chased each other through narrow alleys, their games as old as the town itself, the same games David might have played before his anointing. Boys wrestled and threw stones at targets, dreaming of becoming warriors who would drive out the Romans. Girls helped their mothers, learning to grind grain, bake bread, spin wool, and carry water. Education happened in the synagogue and in the home, where fathers taught their sons a trade and the words of Torah, where mothers taught their daughters the rhythms of keeping a household and keeping faith. The rhythm was timeless, dictated not by Roman sundials, but by the sun's arc and the call to prayer. The Shema was spoken at rising and at rest. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. 3 times a day, the faithful turned toward Jerusalem and prayed, their words rising like incense toward the Temple Mount, where the presence of God was said to dwell. Every week, the Sabbath descended like a bride, bringing rest and remembrance. Every year, the festivals, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, connected them to their ancestors' exodus, to the giving of the law, to God's faithfulness through wilderness wandering. But beneath this rhythm ran an undercurrent of expectation that gave everything an edge, attention. The prophets had spoken specifically of Bethlehem. Micah had declared centuries before, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." Every generation had wondered if they would be the ones to see it. Every generation had scanned the faces of newborn boys, had watched for signs, had hoped and prayed, and passed that hope to their children, like an inheritance more valuable than land. These are the moments that changed everything. If you want to stand in more of them, to feel the weight of history in places where heaven touched earth, subscribe and join me in these sacred spaces. And in this particular year, in this particular season, in the midst of the census chaos, when Bethlehem was more crowded than it had been in living memory, a child had been born in circumstances so humble they would have seemed beneath notice. A young woman named Mary, far from her home in Nazareth, had given birth to her firstborn son in a space meant for animals, because there was no room in the guest quarters of any house. She had wrapped him in strips of cloth and laid him in a feeding trough, while Joseph, her betrothed, stood watch over them both. Shepherds, men whose occupation placed them at the margins of respectable society, who could not observe all the ritual purity laws because of their work, had come that night with strange, urgent stories of angels and proclamations. They spoke of hosts of heaven singing, of glory breaking through the darkness, of a message that seemed impossible. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. But shepherds were known for their long hours alone under the stars, and who could say what visions the night might bring to tired minds? Some believed them, others smiled politely and returned to their homes. Life continued. The Romans did not notice. The priests in Jerusalem, just 6 miles away, but a world apart in influence and power, did not come, King Herod in his fortress palace remained unaware. The world turned as it always had, unaware that in this small house of bread, the bread of life had entered human history. I think often about this profound irony, how the most significant moments can unfold in silence, how transformation can begin without announcement, how the eternal can break into time without shattering it. The people of Bethlehem went about their lives in the days that followed. They paid their taxes to Rome's collectors, observed their festivals as prescribed by the law, told their children the old stories of patriarchs and prophets, and continued waiting for the deliverance they believed must surely come. They did not yet know that deliverance had already arrived, crying in a manger, entirely dependent on human hands for warmth and milk and protection. This is the strange and tender mercy of Bethlehem in 1 AD, that God chose not to arrive in power, but in vulnerability, not in the palace, but in the stable, not announced to kings and governors, but to shepherds watching their flocks by night. The town that had given Israel its greatest king now cradled a different kind of kingship entirely, one that would be established not through military conquest, but through sacrificial love, not through the sword, but through the cross. As we step back from these streets, from the smell of bread baking in clay ovens, and the sound of sheep bleating on the hills, from the weight of Roman occupation and the fire of messianic hope that burned in every faithful heart, we carry with us a truth that echoes across the centuries. The most ordinary places can become the setting for the most extraordinary grace. Bethlehem teaches us that God does not despise small things, that faithfulness in obscurity matters deeply, that the waiting is never wasted, and that heaven's greatest moment came wrapped in humanity's most vulnerable form. The stones of Bethlehem still stand. Pilgrims still come from every nation to walk these ancient paths. The memory of that night, of that birth, still echoes through the world, shaping calendars and cultures, inspiring art and music, dividing history itself into before and after. And in every generation since, people have had to make the same choice the townspeople of Bethlehem faced in that first year, whether to recognize the holy in the humble, whether to bow before a king in swaddling clothes, whether to believe that God would truly come so close, so small, so weak, so human. This is the power of these ancient places. They still speak. They still challenge us to see beyond what appears to what truly is. I want to hear from you. What strikes you most about Bethlehem in this moment of history? What does it mean to you personally that God chose such humble circumstances for such a holy purpose? How does this change the way you see your own ordinary days? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this journey has stirred something in your spirit, if you want to walk through more sacred cities where heaven met earth and changed everything, I invite you to subscribe. There are more stories waiting, more streets to walk, more moments when the eternal broke into time and touched human hearts. Let's discover them together.